Hey, everybody, and welcome to this week's CS and BS. I'm Josh Schachter, founder and CEO of UpdateAI. I have with me here
the one and only, the one and only Jon Johnson. I've been scaling enterprise strategy, value, and retention for the last 12 years. Currently, I'm working at UserTesting, where we're changing the way organizations build products and services through feedback directly from the people who use them. That's directly from my marketing girl. So
yeah,
good job. Thanks.
Nice. Christy would be proud. This is like an odd week, right, John? This is you and I. We're kind of in our man cave here.
Man caves.
Yeah. We've got Mickey out still, and now Christy was out today as well. So So to the chagrin of all of our 10 listeners, like you've got John and Josh, the J squared.
J squared.
J squared. And John, we talked about this. We did this last week with Erica. We want to start to do a little bit more of a structured profile and showcase on the backgrounds of CS leaders and CS practitioners that are out there. I think the whole kind of ethos of this podcast now is not only to talk CS and BS, but to do it in a way where it's really going to help folks as they want to develop and grow their careers, because we know there's so many people that are getting into CS and so many people that want to grow their careers in CS. So what better way than just to listen to the stories of those folks that are already excelling and growing and learning themselves. So you're just an interesting guy. We know that. we know anybody who's ever, struck any conversation with you or seen your posts online or is hip to your new haircut knows that you're just a really interesting personality. And I am really excited because we decided before Christy and Mickey, bailed on us, and maybe this is kind of part of the reason behind that, but we decided that we were going to profile my very own co-host for today, Mr. Jon Johnson.
Me.
You. I'm really excited, John. I've got your resume in front of me. I've got my cheat sheet here, my Cliff Notes. You have, by my count, been a CSM at 6 different establishments.
Well, and there's technically 2 that I don't talk about. So
great. Let's start there. Come on. Okay. So tell me about those.
Man. Yeah, we'll get there.
We'll get there. But in this conversation, John, when I first met you, I think this literally was the first time I met you. It was like at a happy hour. I think it might have been in the happy hour at my apartment.
At your house,
At my house, yes. And there was like a sidebar conversation, and you were kind of holding court a little bit, and you were telling about your own personal background and upbringing. And I remember just being so fascinated and also really inspired by that too. Like really cool. Wow. No, I mean, because it's very unique to say the least, right? And I don't know if it has impacted your journey through CS. I'm hoping that it has, because then it weaves into our because then we could tie it. It's not just a random. Let's just hear about John's,
crazy childhood.
Yeah. Tell us about your crazy childhood, John. Like, tell us, like, where are you from? Let's start with that.
I was born and raised in Monroe, Washington. And we kind of moved around. There's 3 cities that were pretty close: Monroe, Snohomish, and Maltby. They were all like backwoods, like one stoplight. Went to the little bodega for, popcorn and milk and eggs and whatever we needed. So, I spent most of my life until I think I was about 27 or 28 in Washington State.
Okay. In Washington State. And
there's some, we'll sprinkle in a little bit of, but also getting into like the childhood thing. My parents, I was raised very religious. I was first generational Christian, I guess is the term. My dad was like in motorcycle gangs. And my mom was married to like the rival head of another motorcycle gang. And both of my parents had been married 2 or 3 times before. There's a couple stepbrother in there and some other chaos.
Was it 2 or 3?
They're each their third. So when they got married, they were both on their 3rd marriages.
Okay.
And my favorite story of this is that my father's 1st and 3rd wives were named Sharon.
Sharon.
So my mom's name was Sharon. my eldest brother, half brother, who's probably 20 years older than me. His mom's name is Sharon. And my dad always made jokes. He's like, you know what? I never recommend a second marriage or a third marriage, but if you do, just make sure you don't get their names wrong. And, and he always played it off as like a planned thing, but you know how it goes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because
Well, okay,
you've been married a dozen times, right?
What's that? Have I?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. We all, anybody who knows me knows that's very far from the truth.
Very far from the truth.
Yes. So, okay. So let's pretend for a second that we believe, and I'm not saying I don't or I do, but let's say that we believe in epigenetics and the history and the legacy of your family background has impact who you are today.
Yeah.
Even at the molecular level. So I'm really fascinated, with that being said, in hearing about your dad, who was in a motorcycle gang, and your mom, who was married to the head of the rival gang. Did I get that right?
A rival gang. There's a bunch of these weren't like the big, like we're not talking like Sons of Anarchy here. Like these weren't like Hell's Angels, but they were like, so like if you take like I don't know, what's the knockoff version of anything. Take your pick of analogies. I'm struggling. I haven't had enough coffee today, but my dad grew up playing music. He was in a lot of bands growing up, and he found a lot of success in like 50s and 60s rock and roll. So when in the 50s and 60s, he's got a ton of stories of playing Vegas and playing these big shows, and knows a lot of great musicians. I think that is something that he instilled in me. But as the years went on, I don't know if you've spent much time kind of with like the motorcycle crowd, like kind of the 60s and 70s rock.
I've never been involved in a motorcycle gang. No.
Like when I say like I grew up in a crowd of leatherheads and everything that you can think of when it comes to motorcycle gangs, like that was growing up for me.
Like the leather chaps and everything.
Yeah, and everybody had their girl on the back, and I mean, so much like, I know we're kind of meandering a little bit, but, he started playing these big festivals and these big events where motorcycle like actual gangs would go, like they would go and hang out. And my dad's band kind of got to be known, and they got hired by one of these gangs. I used to know it off the top of my head. I know my mom was involved with the Banditos. I have my dad's cuts in the closet, so I can actually go figure out which ones he was in. But anytime there was a party, anytime there was like an event, his band would play, and he was a part of this kind of big group. And he wasn't that big of like a motorcycle guy, but he was befriended by the groups, and so he got brought in. He had a dinky little Honda or something like that. But the stories that he tells me of just like kind of seeing what you see on Sons of Anarchy and in these stories of like people making violent choices. And he has some stories about seeing people getting killed and kind of being in that world that kind of got him into the next phase, which both of my parents lived through the 60s and 70s. Obviously, they did a lot of drugs, made a lot of decisions that I think maybe they wouldn't like me to make these days. And my dad had this pretty pivotal moment coming out of a club. There's a rival gang member who was also coming out of the club, and the group of guys jumped him, and I won't get too graphic, but they held on to him out of the side of a moving vehicle and slammed him into a road pylon. I mean, just like
your dad. They held your dad outside the vehicle.
No. My dad saw this, so he came out of the club and he saw a group that he was a part of like murder a guy in the back of a club parking lot. And on top of all the other stories that he had, like he said, this is like, he always said that this was like the turning point for him. I think my mom was pregnant with my sister at the time. They were living in a motel on Highway 99 outside of Seattle, just kind of transient life. And they legitimately had kind of that like wake up call, like we need to change. And one of the guys that my dad was a part of with this club left the club and started a motorcycle church. And like, I mean, it's like 200 of the hardest guys, face tattoos, leathers, everything, going to church on Sunday. And that was kind of the way that I was raised. That was the church I was raised in. Was my dad was this pastor. He's preaching. He was talking about, his his life from before to where he is now. And Dean and Boo, I forget their last names, but the main pastor was Dean and his wife was Boo. And they lived in Snohomish, Washington. And we would always go over to their house. And I mean, it was just our people. Like, and it was a really beautiful, like, I never felt unsafe. Like, I never felt anything negative. Like, I just felt these people that came out of a really hard life that have, I would say, you want to talk about like how it shaped me. I was shaped by people who knew how to tell a story and knew how to tell their story and connect it to growth. And I think, like, I don't know that I could really put that fine of a pin on it when I was 10, but as I look back, like, I look back at meeting people and then having people share their testimony, but not just like, oh, I was lost, but now I'm found. Like, but full on, like life isn't like a constant, like, it's just ups and downs and constant growth and constant valleys and all these things. And being able to kind of like pin choices and moments into growth was something that I think really affected me and has it really been instilled in me in the way that I communicate, the way that I share. But that led us into probably the most, I think, chaotic experience of my life is, my mom and dad really felt called in this ministry. They wanted to be missionaries and they wanted to figure out how to go proselytize the world and make everybody a Christian, right? Because they saw this change in their life and they wanted to kind of share that. And I'm not going to preach on this podcast, I swear. I'll send you another podcast where I do. My dad was a musician and he was really connected into like the 60s and 70s music world. And there's a guy back then, a Christian singer by the name of Keith Green. And he's the big 70s gospel singer, big afro, plays the piano. Some of my favorite, of that type of music, when I do listen to it, like, I still love some of those records, basically like kind of like the Bob Dylan of Jesus music, even though Bob Dylan himself did hymns. But he started this like weird little thing in East Texas where people would come and learn how to be a missionary. They would learn how to like speak languages. They would learn about the Bible. They learn about all these things, right? And it wasn't what you picture of like a retreat. It was very much like they just bought land and people donated trailers. Like, we lived in a hand-me-down trailer that had no heat and no electricity, and like in the back on 600 acres or whatever. There's like it's tragic because Keith died in a plane accident on the property. His plane crashed and he died with everybody else on the flight. And we stayed, and I was kind of raised with his kids, and it was called Last Days Ministries was the name of it. You can Google it. There's some great pictures. But I just remember,
was this like a David Koresh type of thing? Are we talking? It
wasn't,
about
not so much death, but but I do think, in hindsight, I've spent a lot of time kind of like digging into my psyche of like what this experience was. We ate food that was donated. There was no money. There was no like commerce or economy. It was all gifts. And it was never like the top of the line stuff. So we spent quite a bit of time out there, and they definitely were fire and brimstone. The world is ending. We need to go save people. Otherwise everybody's going to go to hell. And there was like an immediacy and an urgency to this. And I just remember being in a room full of kids, not really sure where the food's coming from, not really sure if it's going to be warm that night because we didn't have heat. And just kind of like not really sure what my life was, if that makes sense. It's like,
and this will be like, this is a naive question, but like, were you aware of your situation?
Yeah. I mean, I was aware that I could never buy shoes or hand-me-down clothes. You know what I mean? Like, I was aware of like the poverty that we were in, and it extended far beyond this. Like when we got back to Washington,
and did it affect you?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I think there's a lot of, I don't know if, I think there's a lot of trauma that I had to unpack as I got older. But that led us into like my parents were not very good missionaries, and they got kicked out. I mean, it's like, you're not raising any money. Because my parents actually held a belief that I believe in, where it's like, look, we're here to work. Like, I should be able to go get a job and pay for the things that I want. Even if I want to go to Mexico and talk about Jesus, I can go get a job and do that. I don't need to go beg other people to pay me for this, right? So this is a belief that is still very much instilled in me, that I'm going to solve my problems, right? I'm not going to go ask for help. Anyways, so we went to another one in Indiana called Daystar Ministries for a few months because my parents really believed that this was their calling. Got same thing. My parents just weren't they weren't raising money. They didn't really fit the mold of whatever it is. So we went back home to Washington, and it was about a year or two where My dad didn't have a job. My mom didn't work. We were homeless. We slept on couches. We slept on floors and garages of, people that we knew from within the church. We finally, my dad, there's a pastor that he had worked with who had kind of another mobile home on the back of his, big, huge lot that he rented to my dad for like $200 a month. And we lived in that for almost 17 years.
Really?
Yeah, until I graduated from high school. So I guess it was 13 years at this point, but until I graduated from high school. But like I had a hole in my floor. I had a piece of plywood that went underneath my bed because it went straight down to the ground. We had no heating. We had a wood stove. Windows were broken. Like, I mean, it was like depressed, like
Wow.
poverty, right? So, and we just never had anything. I will say, like, we'll get into the career part after this, but while I definitely knew that we were broke and, we were around people who were very wealthy, just because we went to a private church, we went to a big church that was like a mega church, and we kind of felt like that was it, but everybody was wealthy and we were not. So I definitely knew, and going through high school, not being able to go on, trips or whatever, having to scrounge around for $20 for lunch, like that was kind of the normal thing. Right. But I also like firmly believe that, like my parents worked very, very hard to communicate love to us. And there wasn't trauma attached to that. It was just,
Mm-hmm.
my dad really struggled with work. He couldn't really figure out what he wanted to do with life. And it's one of those things that, like, I have been very, very focused on not repeating that for my sake and for my kids' sake. Like, I want to have a purpose. And even if I don't know what I want to do with my life, like, I don't sit on my hands and just let life happen in a way that my father did.
Right.
And I'm not really sure where that kind of came from in his, psyche. But for me, it was very much like day one, look, I don't have a job. I'm going to go work at McDonald's. I'm going to go work at Starbucks. I'm going to go do whatever I need to do in order to pay the bills that I need to, so that my kids don't feel this. Right.
Right.
So there's this like almost urgency in me, and a lot of like my decisions in my career and why I'm doing what I'm doing, why I left music, because I was a musician for a while, are based on those experiences of saying, like, I want to make sure that, like, I'm providing for the people that rely on me, so that 20 years from now, they're not sitting on a podcast talking about having to fight for a 2-day-old slice of pizza or something like that.
That's amazing. But yeah, well, okay. So you did feel loved, though.
Yeah.
It was a nuclear family,
It
despite
was.
your poverty and kind of your situation.
Right.
And you could have made poor choices, right? I would imagine. Like,
I'm sure there's plenty of it.
I'm sure you did. Yeah. It's not giving you too much credit, right? But like when you're fighting over a 2-day-old pizza, like, how can you focus on your algebra test coming up the next day, right?
Yeah.
Or like, and yet you did graduate high school, right?
Mm-hmm.
You did graduate college, right?
Barely. Yeah, I did.
You got it. You got the paper.
Yeah.
You are very gainfully employed and continue to grow and rise in your career. You have a very nuclear family right now of your own. It's, I don't know, man. It's kind of awe inspiring, to be honest with you. It really is inspiring. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was the first in my nuclear family to go to college and graduate. So my sister, we always joke that she went to like a private Bible college in Kirkland, Washington, called Northwest Bible College. And she got her MRS degree, which was the joke, because she went to like a semester and got married a pastor's son, and popped out 5 kids, and then left, and that was it. She quit school because she just stayed at home with the kids. That's what she wanted to do. I actually went to art school. I went, I had a little bit of a dalliance in the I went to University of Washington for like a semester. I mean, like, I went into English 101, and there was like 600 people in one class. And just for context, I graduated, I don't know the exact number. It was like 20 to 30 kids in my graduating class. And I'd been going to school with them since pretty much kindergarten.
Yeah.
So like my entire school, all K through 12 was like 200 people.
But John, how do you even go from homelessness and what you described? And I don't want to like,
no, it's fine,
overstate it or patronize it or whatever, right? But like, how do you go from that to even getting into the University of Washington?
Yeah. So
what drove you?
Luckily, And there are a lot of luckilies in my story. You know, we were connected. We went to this small school before I went to Cedar Park, which was the high school I graduated from. I went to a school in Monroe called Monroe Christian, and we were lucky enough to be surrounded by some incredible families, and not just by wealth. I mean, like templates, if you will, of what a life could be, right? So obviously private schools are expensive. So instead of, you know, buying houses and all these things, like we lived in this dump and so that we could go to these schools. And a lot of the successes that I've made are from the education that I got, because it is second to none. I mean, I make jokes about how small the school was, and I make jokes about just going to school in a church and like having to wear a tie on Fridays and praying and all this kind of stuff. But like, you know, I read Dickens in 6th grade, and I fell in love with literature, and I fell in love with science. And I was surrounded in very, very small classrooms with teachers that drove individual successes and told individual stories through their students. And it is still the greatest gift that my parents ever gave me. And they worked their asses off. I mean, we had to go to the church that the school is at because we got a 20% discount if we were members.
Right.
And my mom was the attendance lady at the school because we got a 50% discount for employees. And like, and we just kind of stacked coupons when it came to a private education.
Right.
So we had to go, like, that was it. Right. And there's some, I rebelled quite a bit. I wanted to get kicked out. I wanted to go to public school because they had dances and girls that wore skirts and, you know, all the things that, you know, you think about high school. But you know, leading up into that, when I graduated high school and when I went into those tests, like I was 3 years ahead of everybody coming in as a freshman. Like the math that I was doing was, you know, like a junior in college. Like it's just, it was so foreign to me that this wasn't kind of the normalcy of what education was, right? And I still, like, I'm so grateful for the education that I was given and the work that my parents did to give me that.
So you didn't have money, but you had values.
Yeah, big time.
Yeah.
And I did not complete that English 101 course at the University of Washington. I had I think probably my first panic attack. We won't go into like the anxiety, and there's a good amount of trauma that kind of came out of those life experiences that are pretty guarded. I'm happy to talk about it because it is growth and a part of my story, but I think it kind of delves us off topic a little bit.
Yeah.
But I called mom. I was like, this isn't it. I can't do it. I'm crying. Like I was sobbing like the second day in this class. I was like, I just can't do this. Like there's 600, I've never seen 600 people in my life. Like what on earth are you doing to me? Right. So I kind of just tried to do the church thing for a little bit. And I joined another kind of like music thing through church and played a bunch of youth groups in colleges across the country. And it's kind of my first experience, like learning the guitar and playing in front of people. And again, like it was just kind of like a breath. For me, it was like a breath. I just kind of like, it's like, what do I want to do? Right. And the music thing really kind of stuck. And my dad bought me guitars and I traveled and I did all these things. Right. And when I came home, mom said, you know, you still really need to go to college. And like, that's the thing that needs to happen. And the deal was if I graduated, they would pay for it somehow. So mom found this program at the Art Institute of Seattle, and it was a music production and business program. It was like a applied bachelor's. It wasn't even like a real bachelor's, like the non-transferable type, right?
Yeah.
But it's a piece of paper and it works. And I sat in a studio in Seattle for a couple of years and just worked with some incredible musicians and figured out business and figured out performance and figured out recording and production and spent some incredible years doing some of the most phenomenal things with music that I'm so proud of and that have shaped me in ways that, you know, are, I'm still identifying. And then, you know, go ahead. You have a question?
No, and that's a whole separate episode is your musical career, because you are a professional musician. You have been. I went to Austin City Limits a couple of weeks ago, and you're looking at the lineup with me, and you're like, oh yeah, you know, I played with this person, like I know that guy, and then you send us a text message to our podcast crew this weekend with a photo of you playing with One Direction,
One Republic.
Oh, One Republic.
One Republic.
Okay.
Very different.
Okay, very different. Okay,
yeah.
I don't know music so well.
No, it's fine.
But you did make it, which is really cool. Let's skip over that. Let's skip over talking about all the groupies, and let's go straight into like what came next. I don't know if that was that CS. Did CS come directly from that?
No, so I had a kid, and I think the first left turn of my life was in college. I was older, so I was I graduated from college when I was like 26 or 7. Just took a lot of years in between, and I'm a firm believer in taking your own path to education and that kind of stuff. But the girl that I was with at the time, we wound up getting pregnant. And we went through a whole bunch of discussions around, what we were going to do. She was 19. I was, 24, 25 or something at this time. And we just we were going to be parents. Right. And so I went from being this guy on the road and playing shows and sleeping on floors and not worrying if I had $20 because it was just me to, oh my God, how am I going to do this? How am I going to be in studios until 2:00 in the morning and come home to my kid? And we talked a little about it earlier, is that while there wasn't a whole lot of money, there was morals and there was love and there was a unit. And I always wanted that. I always, at whatever point, and as soon as it was kind of brought to me, obviously that's the decision that we made. It's like, oh my God, I got to figure this out. Right. And a buddy of mine who was also a musician and producer worked at Microsoft. He got a job in the audio visual department at Microsoft. So they worked on sound and the noises and whatnot within Microsoft. And after Connor, my eldest, was born, he turns 18 in 2 weeks, which is so weird.
Awesome.
And
Happy birthday, Connor.
I know. He's just my best friend ever. And I love him. And a lot of where I'm at today is because of him popping out of his mom and saying, feed me, and figuring out I need health insurance and I need a regular paycheck. And I got this interview at Microsoft and I realized, and this is what kind of leads me into where I'm at today, is that, the things that I did in the studio, the things that I did on the road, touring, the things that I did with pretty much everything up until that point was problem solving, but like with a point. I like to say, somebody would come to me and be like, oh, I want this song to sound like X. And I would just kind of do the math of, we need this synthesizer and we need this bass line and we need this tempo and we need this melody and these words. Right. And just kind of being very creative with very little input. And that's what this job at Microsoft was, is that people within Microsoft would come to me and the team that I was at and said, hey man, I got this problem, or this projector doesn't work, or we need these microphones. And I would have to then solve it with my toolkit. Right. And I really loved building relationships. And I found I've said this before, one of the key components that I think led me into customer success was this job at Microsoft of somebody coming to me for the first time, really enjoying the experience, getting their problem solved. And then 3 months later being like, oh, you know what? I got to call John. I'm going to call John. I'm not going to go to this tool. I'm going to go to John, and I'm going to tell these other people to go to John. And this kind of referral, this kind of champion, this kind of, look, I'm here to solve your problems. That's the only reason that I'm here.
To help.
And and we're going to get from point A to point B, and we're going to look at the whole alphabet. Right. And it was a great job. I was there for just under 3 years. It was my first time I got laid off too, in 2009 when Microsoft did their big layoffs. So that was also a learning curve. But I just kind of figured out, man, I really like building relationships. I actually really like software. I really like meeting people that are in software and creative. So programmers, engineers, these kind of folks. I took a couple jobs. I had a marketing job. I did some, I worked as a BDR. If you kind of read up my career path, mostly startups, early stage startups. I did some, my first customer success job was this nonprofit in Seattle. And it was right before I moved to Denver. I really think customer success really for me, started, I moved from Seattle, I moved to Denver, and I moved to California, and it really started in California. So I did a lot of early stage startups, just I want to work in software. I want to work with entrepreneurs. I want to figure out what those problems are. Right. And so I moved to Ventura, California in 2010, maybe 2010, 9, 10. Math is hard. Numbers are weird. Who cares? It's not like there's a calendar in front of me that tells me exactly when. But Uber had just launched, and I didn't have a job. We were living with the in-laws at the time. My middle child was probably 2, Noah. He was 2 at the time. And I met the founder of this company called Invoca in Santa Barbara, California. And I took him to the airport. We had a really good conversation, and he saved my number, and I same kind of thing as Microsoft. Like he was like, hey, I need a ride. Are you out? I was like, yeah, no problem. We just kind of had a couple of those conversations, and he introduced me to hiring managers. He introduced me to the person in charge of customer success. And it's funny, I remember this, the first time I got my first customer success manager job at Invoca. I was there. I loved this company. I still love this company. And I remember coming in, I was one of the first CSMs. Everybody else was like, they hadn't moved over to customer success. It was still customer support, and it was still these things, right? So I remember on day one, Lorelei introduced me to the team. It's like, this is John. He's a customer success manager. And there's like 3 people that I sat next to that saw the title manager and thought I was their boss, right? They're like, oh, you're our boss. And they were like talking to me like I'm their new manager or whatever. And I remember that first week I was so confused because I'm like, I don't think that I'm their boss. And I remember meeting with Lorelei, my boss, and being like, I need some clarity. So Jen over here thinks so-and-so. And she's like, oh, no, we're changing titles. And it was fine. But there was like a brief moment where I was like, did I just like fake my way into leadership somehow?
Well, that's all getting into leadership is, right? Just fake your way. Yeah.
You're just there at the right time. So and that was, I mean, I was.
So you went from Invoca to ShipHawk to GiddyUp to Zinnier to Splash, and now you're at UserTesting. So
correct.
You've gone through quite the run there. And for someone who's had the background that you had, where it was a little bit nomadic, literally and figuratively, what has stuck about CS for you?
I think that one of the core competencies is understanding that we're talking about humanity. Like truthfully, like we're talking, people don't say this directly, but like when you, in these roles, when you're solving someone's problem, there's a person on the other end of that Zoom. Back then it was in person or whatever, before the digital, whatever. But that you have to think about the other person. You have to think about, put yourself into their shoes. There's an empathy driver. There's all of these things. Yes, you need skills, but the soft skills are the things that I had in spades. And I think that's one of the things that has given me stability in this, is that no matter how stressed I am or how pissed off I am because leadership doesn't listen, like there is this thing in my brain that still goes and says, hey, this SVP that I work with is an idiot or whatever, but they're a person and they're just trying to do their job. And maybe they have something that they're missing. So instead of me just bitching and being annoyed and just rage quitting, it's like, yes, we're going to go through those emotions and we're going to come to a place where everybody's just trying to do their jobs. Right. And I think in this position, why I've never really gone into sales is because if you don't hit your quota 3 quarters in a row, they fire you. If you don't, like there's just like, there's much more tactical steps. Yeah, you can make way more money, but I've just never wanted to be transactional.
Right.
And I would say like the other thing that you will notice, I have taken the next step in my career at another job. It has been rare for me to work for a company for a couple of years, get a promotion at that company, and expand my career. I've always had to find, people ask me why like I left these places. There's 2 very, very serious like layoffs, and that was at ShipHawk and at Zinnier, that I had just, I needed a job. But by and large, like Invoca, I worked as a direct CSM without a promotion for 2.5 years. And I really struggled with, am I not good enough? Like, why is everybody else getting promotions and not me? And my reviews are excellent, but I'm just not getting there. Right. And I think that's something that people maybe don't talk about in these kind of paths is, look, we're going to talk about all the happy things, but my life and my career has really been baked on, I'm going to go find what I want. I'm going to go find what I need. I'm not going to wait for somebody to give it to me. With respect, like I'm not just hopping around every 6 months, but if I feel like, and I know that I can do this other job, I'm going to go find it. You know what I mean? And I'm going to put in the work, I'm going to put in the effort. And then if nobody's going to give it to me, which that's half of the time, there's just as many people that listen to this that have gotten looked over for the promotion for whatever reason.
Yeah.
And that's kind of been my career, is that like, I really put effort in and I spend a lot of time. And then like, if 3 or 4 quarters go by and they're like, we'll think about it next quarter. We'll think about it next quarter. It's like, okay, well, I'm thinking about it this quarter. So I'm going to go find it. Right. And that's kind of led me right now. My current title is Principal Customer Success Manager, Key Accounts on the Globals team, which is a mouthful. but it's like the highest there is until you get into management, right? And it's like, I'm just kind of like kicking this can down the road into what does management look like? And those are the conversations that I'm having right now with myself and
But
with my mentors.
let's also not downplay your experience and what
Right.
you do. Right, you're in management. You are a leader to those on your team for sure. I know that from knowing you personally, and that resonates with me. Your story very much in that sense, because until my last role, I had never been, and I'm 39, right? I had never been promoted in my career.
Yeah.
And I had leveled up nicely through going from, role to role, because I didn't want to stay stagnant in places that weren't going to be the right fit. And I also wasn't leaving after 6 months. I was staying there for a year and a half, 2 years, 3 years. But at a certain point, if you're not getting fulfilled, then it does behoove you to keep your ears to the ground.
Yeah. And I think, we're living in a world right now that is just full of layoffs and rifts and all these things. And I think we talked about this a couple podcasts ago, where it's like, we just need to put an asterisk on everything after 2019.
Right.
Because it's like, I tried my best, and, there's a friend of mine that just got laid off after 3 weeks after getting hired. I mean, it's just, there's so much chaos. But yeah, I mean, I think I have been, let's see, where do I want to go with that? I think that I really like this idea. I'm going to use a term that's like drenched in church. And I have separated this term from the religion aspect of it, but servant leadership. This is something that is paramount to me, is that I do not believe that you need to have a director or a VP or an SVP title to be a leader. And I think experience comes from figuring out how to move, from 0 to 1. And it's just, what's the problem that you're applying this to, right? And so I've had some team lead roles. I've worked in a lot of coaching opportunities. I currently now kind of set big strategy that would kind of describe yourself as a manager or a senior manager, solving millions upon millions upon millions of dollars, and then working cross-functionally with leadership and teams within user testing. And I love it. And there's a part of me that doesn't need to have that title that says manager of customer success.
Yep.
Because what I'm doing right now is what I want to learn. I want to learn how to be in a room with directors and set pricing initiatives and figure out forecasting for segments and these things that I'm doing right now that are very, very fun. And then there's the flip side of it that is very much just like, man, if I went and applied for like a head of or whatever title, the first thing they would say is, well, why don't you have that title now? And there would be a ton of explanation and asterisks of why I have that experience. And most of the time I get through it and that's fine. But, we live in such a line by line society that says, well, we have 10,000 people that have, applied for this job. I have to look at the people that have this title just to narrow it down a little bit. Right. So.
Yeah. But that's also why relationships matter.
Yeah.
When you're looking for jobs, and
absolutely,
you are a master of relationships. And I think from what you were describing, like your background taught you to be able, like, for survival, like you and your family had to build relationships. Right.
Well, and I'll go back and, we're looking at, okay. So I mentioned at the top that there's 2 roles that I was at for less than 6 months that I kind of took off my resume, not because of any other reason other than just, they were like layovers in my opinion.
Yeah.
So I went from Invoca, really looking for kind of like that next step up. The ShipHawk job, they poached me. They came at me and they said, man, we're going to give you $100,000 or whatever. I don't remember at the time. It was more money than I was making at the time. And I was like, oh, hell yeah, this is great. And at the time, the team there's like 150 people in the company. And within 3 months of starting, they laid off 80% of the company. And I was left, and I was the only CS person there. And we had the founders and we had a couple salespeople. ShipHawk is doing great. They're still, crushing right now, but there was like a 2-year period where they really struggled with product market fit and with their market. And they just really, really struggled. And I kind of did everything from onboarding to training to offboarding to everything. Right. And I was there for a year, and coming up on the end, I was like, this is going down again. You know what I mean? Like, this is one of those things where I was like, there's going to be another round of layoffs. I'm seeing it coming. I'm looking at the dollars in the bank account right now. Like, I can see what our run rate is. They're not restocking LaCroix anymore. Like, this is all hands on deck. Right. So I started applying, And the point that I make is since ShipHawk, every job that I've gotten has come from, hey, I need something. You know what I mean? Like I went to a CS meetup in Santa Barbara that actually was being held at Invoca, and the head of CS from another company called Procore was there, and him and I had known each other from the Invoca days. And I just told him, I was like, hey, I'm at ShipHawk. Everybody, it's a small tech company in tech environment in Santa Barbara. So, you know, they're like, they knew what was going on. I was like, I really need a job, you know, and they're like, hey, I've got an SMB role. It'll hold you over. There's growth, whatever it is. I mean, it was like, I took that job and it was half of my salary. Like it was not something, it was like going back to work at Starbucks. Right. But it was something, and it was benefits, and it was beautiful. And I'm so grateful for it.
And you weren't afraid to ask. You didn't.
And I wasn't afraid to ask. Right. And I didn't even, I barely interviewed. Like it was just like, here, just sign the paperwork. And it was beautiful. And I still love Procore. There's friends that I have that still work there. I still mentor some of the folks that I work with there. Shout out to Charlotte. But from there, it's like, okay, I did, I think it was like 3 or 4 months. And another friend of mine who runs like a marketing startup called Giddy Up in Ventura. And I had been talking about CS, and he was really starting to refine what CS was at his company. And he brought me on, and he offered me way more money than I thought I was worth at the time. And it was like the biggest pay raise and promotion, you know, so I quit. Obviously I quit Procore very, very quickly. And the team understood, like they were so grateful. Like they paid me out for my bonuses, even though I didn't finish a course. Like they were so gracious about it. And, you know, Giddy Up, it was my first like senior title. And it was also my first kind of like dotted line management where like, help me. What do I do here? Because we had people, and I hired friends that had never been in CS before. That was like one of my best friends at the time, Matt, was a sales guy at Coke, and he's still crushing it. And Jacob, one of the other guys, is a head of CS somewhere else. Like these people are doing, not that it's on me, but like it was the first time that I was with people that were striving, that were like really pushing to up their skills. And the director at the time, it just is an incredible coach. And, you know, from there, it was like my old boss at Invoca reached out to me and said, hey, we need somebody to lead the CS team at Zinnier. And it was another startup, and they gave me another raise, and I got the team lead role. And it was just like, yeah, I'm going to do that. And then 2020 happened, right? I mean, that takes us up to the pandemic, and I got.
But basically, your growth has been from being a good person.
Yeah,
and I say that knowing you very well as well.
80%.
80%. The other 20% is, again, that's for the other podcast. But I want to wrap us up soon. I want to talk about where you are today.
Yeah,
and like if you like, what's the goal? So 2 questions. What's the goal? What's the goal of this whole thing? You look at, you know, the number of years you got left. What's the goal for you? And like you mentioned it in passing, but what's the next step for you personally as far as your career growth?
Yeah, I've actually been thinking about this a lot. I would say up until probably Splash, which was before UserTesting. And then there was like 3 months at PayPal that was the worst experience of my entire fucking life. Just
okay. Then tell us why. Tell us why.
So I got poached, and again, somebody reached out to me and like, hey, we know you, we listen to this podcast, and we'd love that. We want you to do this thing. And they gave me so much money. I mean, like I should have seen that as a red flag. You know what I mean? It's one of those things where we're like, I'm going to take this, but holy crap.
You're selling your soul.
Yeah, I'm selling my soul, right? And within 3 months, like the leadership, there was just such a mismatch. There was, you know, I mean, I'll be the first to admit, like there was malfeasance going on. There was like people were asking me to like change numbers on reports, and people were asking, and this is like a sub brand of the big parent company, and come at me if you want. I got the documentation. I talked to HR. Like I went through the whole thing, like filed complaints. Like did the whole thing. And I just couldn't.
Are you a whistleblower?
I was. Yeah. I mean, when the CEO or somebody says this, our key client has concerns, and this report is going to give them more concerns, so delete the bottom half of this report and then send it to them. Yeah, I'm gonna be like, fuck that. I'm not gonna do that. Yeah. You know. So, and then I quit. Like I was just like, I'm out. I can't do that. So since then, you know, with Splash and with UserTesting, actually the CEO of Splash, I worked with at Invoca. So this all kind of ties back to Invoca. And at UserTesting was the director from Zinnier was at UserTesting. So there's just a lot of this kind of, complementary circles.
Well, it means that you've left your relationships on good terms, which is incredibly important for your long-term career, except for PayPal. Well, but who knows? Maybe that'll boomerang at some point.
Yeah, could be. So I've actually been spending a lot of time thinking about like what's my next title. Like I've never really thought about when I got this job as a principal. I was like, we had a principal at Splash, and we used to make fun of her title all the time in good fun. But it's just like, what does that even mean? And now I'm like, this is karma. I want the big audacious goal is I want my impact to be a force multiplier. Up until this point, I have impacted individuals, and I've got a list of 100 individuals that I can call on for references and that I'm proud of their careers because of feedback that I've given. Like there are some incredible things that I've done one-to-one, and regardless of title or station or anything, I want a larger impact. But I also want it to be a reflection as well, where the masses influence myself, right? And I think I would love to set process and culture for an early stage SaaS product. Meaning, I want to hire the first CSM, and I want to set what our health metrics are, and I want to understand how we make sure that we don't forget about the customer when we're changing our processes.
Oh man, dude, I wish we were a little bit more advanced at Update. I wish we were there, needing to build out our proper CS team. I would snag you up in a heartbeat. Just just hold on for another 9 months.
I'm also like, we're going through a merger and an acquisition and all these things, and there's a lot of fun things right now at UserTesting. Like I'm not in a rush; it'll come, and I'm having internal conversations too about maybe what that path looks like internally. But I think like more than anything, I think I want to be a decision maker on how customers experience a brand, and I've got some, like, I don't necessarily want to work in housing or legal or any of these kind of specific segments, but I think to be in the room when those decisions are first made, to set the standard that will be, compared against for the following years. That's what I want to do.
Yeah.
And I'd love to do it like in an empathetic, humanity driven society or, account or customer or whatever it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Brand,
well,
sounds
like whether that's at UserTesting or elsewhere, it sounds like you're going to have some wonderful options ahead of you, John. Okay. Well, you know me, I'm the one that always cuts the show short so that we don't lose our audience's attention. I'm focused on the metrics of, completion rate of listenership. So, this was fun. I don't think we could do this with really anybody else. I think, you've got interesting stories. That Thanks, background man. Really has done that for you. And I don't know, should we just do these podcasts one-on-one moving forward? Or should we bring Christy and Mickey back? I don't know.
I really like Christy and Mickey
a
lot. No, but also like, I think the other side of it is like, I hope that more people have these conversations. Like the thing that I would say that leads, and I'll end on this, that leads those relationships is when you meet somebody and there's a vibe or like an energy, or even if it's just a boss relationship, individual contributor to boss relationship. I always lead with my story. I always lead with what drives me, so that when somebody asks somebody else about me, the first thing that they say isn't, oh, he gets his job done. It's, oh my gosh, he cares. Like the amount of people are like, you really care about customer success. And at first, sometimes it's a backhanded compliment because let's be honest, we're not saving babies here. But like, start with what drives you, and you will find people who are driven in the same way that you will be able to build something off of, whether it's a linear path, whether it's cyclical, whatever it is. If you walk away not knowing who that person is on the other end of the call, then you've done yourself a disservice and the other person.
I love it. Jon Johnson, folks, my esteemed co-host on CS and BS, usually more responsible for the BS, but today it was all CS. Principal Customer Success Manager at UserTesting.
Key accounts.
Of key accounts. Very partitioned there. Yeah. Thanks, John. Thanks for sharing your story and being so open about it.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Josh. I appreciate it.
All right. And we're out. Awesome,
And
dude.
we're out.
It was good. That was great.
Thanks. Yeah, I
That was
appreciate
great.
it.
Yeah, that was fun. That was fun. Yeah. Yeah.
You're going to see a sharp decline halfway through of people being like, guys.